Josh ready?
Ready.
Is opponent ready? Alright, let's begin. I affirm the resolution. Resolved. Jury nullification ought to be used in the face of perceived injustice. My value is that of Nirvana. According to the philosophy of Buddhism, it is a dimension transcending time and space, and thus is even difficult to talk about or even think about. Words and thoughts are only being suited to describe this space-time dimension. But because Nirvana is beyond time, there is no movement, there is no aging or dying. Thus, Nirvana is an eternal philosophy. Because it is beyond space, there is no causation, there is no boundary, there is no conception of self and not self. Thus, Nirvana is infinite. The Buddha also assures that Nirvana is an experience of profound happiness. Those who achieve enlightenment are called Buddhists. There are 35 Buddhas in the Tibetan philosophy and 28 Theravada's philosophy. My value criterion for today's debate is evaluating utile through the perspective of Buddhism. Prefer my value criterion for two reasons. One, no other framework describes the meaning of life, rather, what to do during life. Without knowing the end goal of life's journey, there's no motivation to change our actions, and hence no reason to follow moral rules, destroying morality as a whole. We see that life is in suffering and enduring pain, only to emerge later as real and utter happiness and peace. Every theory assumes something is good. Utilitarians think that pleasure is good, and deontology think that protecting dignity is good. But Nirvana as a whole is the ultimate goal, as it unites every philosophy together, and is the ultimate happiness. Therefore, it is the strongest impact in today's round. Contention 1, the first noble truth. Suffering is required in order for humans to attain Nirvana. According to the philosophy of Buddhism, the first noble truth is that life is suffering. To live, you must suffer. It is impossible to live without experiencing some kind of suffering. We have to endure physical suffering like sickness, injury, tiredness, old age, and eventually death. And we have to endure psychological suffering like loneliness, frustration, fear, embarrassment, disappointment, anger, etc. According to my opponent's case, my opponent, like his predecessors, shall come up here and tell you how jury nullification is biased and will cause hurt to people everywhere. This, under Buddhism philosophy, is inherently good because we need the suffering in order to further achieve us towards a nirvanic society. As such, promoting jury nullification can provide the stimulus for suffering and pain in order to better help these minorities, and so that they can further attain the first noble truth, and with that, Nirvana. Living within a government promotes human rights, equality, freedom of speech, and other individuals' rights. Simply promotes a system that lacks suffering and thus condemns humans to continuously be reborn as a lesser and lesser animal. In order to counteract this as such, we have to promote suffering. Thus, frequent race-based nullification would institutionalize racism within today's society. Professor Andrew Leopold responds to an essay by saying frequent race-based nullification would only help solidify institutional racism within the criminal justice system. African Americans comprise a hugely disproportionate percentage of the criminal defendants in the prison population. To do so otherwise would be turning a blind eye to the exponential growth of the minorities in the prison system. He warned that deliberately engaging in the course of race-based nullification would engage in the course of race-based nullification, which is foolish and dangerous. But the proposal is of nullification assumes that black jurors are alienated from the justice system, lacks political means for readdressing their political issues, and will only nullify non-violently. Victimless criminals. Professor Leopold argues that Professor Butler's proposal is dangerous because the proposal would likely harm African Americans that jury nullification supposedly helps. Leopold asserts that race-based decisions would inevitably perpetuate harmful stereotypes of African Americans, polarize a society already struggling with racial division, and sadly give up their right for equal treatment. Thus, jury nullification will inherently hurt these African Americans by causing more racism. But underneath the Buddhist philosophy, this would actually be inherently a good thing, because as society goes on, we need suffering. We need them to be able to experience this so that they can achieve nirvana later in life. Racism makes war and genocide possible. Biopolitics would not become genocide without it. Amanda O2 writes, racism grants the conditions for the acceptable of putting death in society of normalization. Racism is desperately a condition to be able to put death towards someone in order to put death towards others. Since the population is no more than what the state takes care for its own sake, of course, the state is entitled to slaughter it if necessary. Racism is the thanatopolitics of biopolitics of the total state. The long history within society shows that, like in Nazi Hitler Germany, these Jews were being criticized against and being prejudiced for who they were, and were such put on this idea and were terminated within concentration camps. causing genocide. But this in turn caused more suffering to humans. But like I said within my philosophy, suffering is ultimately good because it benefits people everywhere and it will in turn lead to happiness in the future. It's not about what's happening now. It's okay if it's causing suffering now because in the future it will cause benefits for people everywhere. Thus, my contention too is the second noble truth. When we feel we want something and are unable to get it, we feel frustrated. When we expect someone to live up to our expectations, they do not. We feel let down and disappointed. When we want others to like us, they don't. We feel hurt. Even when they want something and are able to get it, this often does not lead to happiness either, because it's not too long before we get bored with that feeling. Even if we get happiness, and even if we get all this stuff, suffering comes from craving. When we get what we want, when we crave, we will never be satisfied. Thus, suffering is inevitable and will always lead to nirvana, because no matter how much more we want it, that will lead to more craving, and as such, will lead to ultimate nirvana. And for these reasons and these reasons alone, and how nirvana is the ultimate value criterion in today's debate, and how jury nullification inherently causes harms to people everywhere and causes all this segregation, and that's a good thing. That would be a good thing, and you must affirm today.
You want to just use your timer?
What?
You want to just use your timer?
Sure, that's fine.
Go ahead and start. Is the judge ready?
And he was good there on time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead and start. Okay. What does your case have to do with jury nullification?
Well, my case first talks about how suffering is the most best thing for society, because under the Buddhist philosophy, if we endure suffering, that would ultimately lead to happiness, and jury nullification by being implemented.
So is it not true that you're basically, the point that you're making is that jury nullification is bad to people, therefore we should consider it good?
I'm saying that it's bad right now, but in the ultimate future, and what we're achieving towards in a life of fulfillment and happiness, this would be ultimately the best
so
thing.
Under that philosophy, you're basically saying that things like racism or the Holocaust are actually good for the people who are victimized by it because they'll achieve nirvana in the end?
If everyone achieved the value of nirvana, and everyone achieved underneath the Buddhist philosophy, and everyone was like this,
now,
that would ultimately help
let me ask
people,
you a
because that's what
question.
the Noble Truth shows us, and this is what's been embodied by society.
Let me ask you a question. This resolution is limited to the United States, correct?
Yeah.
How prominent is Buddhist philosophy in the United States?
I mean, I don't know that, because
Is it
there's like
very
millions
common?
of people. I mean, I know a large majority of the Chinese population that are my
Okay,
friends.
but like in terms of the majority of the U.S. population, is this type of philosophy something that most people in this country will agree with?
Yes, everyone agrees that happiness is an ultimate.
So you would
end to
say that
means.
if you went around the country and asked a person, if you suffer right now, that's actually good for you, they would agree with you?
No, I would ask them, do you believe that happiness is your ultimate goal in life? They would be like, yes, I do want happiness.
Okay.
And then I would show
Right,
them
but
that
do you
through
think-
Buddhist philosophy and
Right,
during
but do
all
you
this
think
stuff,
that
this would
actually,
happen.
you actually believe that Buddhist philosophy is more prominent than other forms of
I believe that the
of
Buddhist
religion?
philosophy is the ultimate good for all people, because no matter what you do through the Buddhist, like if you do things through the Buddhist lens and how we evaluate them through the Buddhist lens, that will ultimately
Okay.
cause benefits
Okay,
for all people everywhere.
so your case is basically reliant, correct me if I'm wrong, on the fact that you're assuming that I will say that jury nullification is bad for people, therefore it's actually morally justified.
I mean, that's what Neg usually says. and
Okay,
you
but
don't
I
know
haven't
that.
spoken a word yet in this round. How can you assume that I'm going to say that?
Well, we've all been to like 3 other tournaments on this topic,
Okay,
and we
that's
assume
fine.
that Neg will always make the
But-
argument
but
that
how-
races are juries are biased and racist. And I'm telling you that this would ultimately be
Okay,
kind
so
of
what were to happen if I did not say those things?
That would be offense onto the app. So you could do that.
Okay, I don't have any more questions.
Okay.
Use some prep time.
And as you can say, you're allowed 2 minutes total, or
4 minutes.
4 total?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right now it's about 1:55. All ready?
Yes.
Judge, ready?
Yes, sir.
Begin right now. Theodore Roosevelt once said, "No man is above the law, and no man is below it, nor do we ask any man's permission when we require him to obey it. Obedience to the law is demanded as a right, not asked as a favor. If we allow the optional appreciation of laws, we will have created a system in which some people are above the law and some people are below the law. It is for these reasons that I negate today's resolution. Resolved, in the United States criminal justice system, jury nullification ought to be used in the face of perceived injustice." My value for today's debate is preserving the social contract. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines the social contract as an actual or hypothetical agreement among the members of an organized society or between a community and its rulers that defines and limits the rights and duties of each. Preserving the social contract is essential as a value because the social contract is the basis of the formation of human society and is an integral part of America's society, with examples including the Mayflower Compact and the Constitution itself. Preserving the social contract is best measured by the criterion of law and order, which is defined by the Oxford Dictionary as a situation characterized by respect for and obedience to the rules of a society. Preserving the social contract relies on people following the laws, and if the rule of law is not upheld, the agreement made by man with the state is violated. A system of laws is the basis of any structured society, and this is in essence what separates humanity from all other animals. Today I will argue that jury nullification undermines and threatens the rule of law, thus violating the preservation of the social contract. Observation 1. Humans have a moral obligation to follow the laws. In his Socratic dialogues, especially Credo, Plato dictates that human beings are bound to the laws and are morally obligated to obey them. According to Northwestern University professor R.E. Allen in 1980, the Credo maintains that legal obligation rests essentially neither on force nor a set of rules fixed in the nature of things or the mind of God. It maintains that fidelity to the legal order is a moral obligation, and of such weight as to require Socrates to abide by an unjust sentence of death. Contention 1. Jury nullification oversteps the role of citizens in the democratic process. According to Crispo, Slansky, and Uriarte, the Loyola of Los Angeles Law Review in 1997, nullification results in inconsistent application of laws, allows bad law to remain on the books, and permits juries to disregard the law without accountability. This disregard gives juries unreviewable, unchecked power and results in arbitrary judicial results. When legislators make law that violates the so-called conscience of the community, their acts are reviewable by voters, who can cast votes against their legislators at election time. Between elections, constituents can write to their legislators and express their opposition. By giving a jury nullification instruction, judges ask jurors to act as mini legislators, placing too burdensome a duty upon those individuals who are compelled to serve on jury duty. What this means is that jury nullification goes beyond the proper roles and obligations of a citizen in the United States, because the role of the citizen in the democratic process is to vote and critique the government, not to make new laws or disobey or ignore existing ones. Because of this, jury nullification violates the agreement of the citizens to follow the laws of the state under the social contract. Contention 2. Jury nullification undermines the rule of law. According to Crispo, Slansky, and Uriarte of the Loyola of Los Angeles Law Review in 1997, if jury nullification were a common practice, laws would change day to day, leading to anarchy rather than a society where all must live by the same standards. Juries are not empaneled to solve social problems. The jury's duty is to apply the facts of the law as stated by the court and reach a verdict consistent with the law. In other words, jury nullification undermines the rule of law by allowing common citizens to choose whether or not a law should be applied in a certain situation or to a certain person. This unequal and random application of the law, in turn, violates the social contract. Concluding my case, it is because jury nullification oversteps the role of the citizen in the democratic process and undermines the rule of law that jury nullification ought not be used in the face of perceived injustice in order to uphold law and order and thus preserve the social contract. Okay, moving on to my opponent's case. Basically, my opponent has ran a case in which he cites Buddhist philosophy. His values, Nirvana, his value criterion is essentially achieving Nirvana, and his first and second criteria have to do with how suffering is necessary, suffering is inevitable, and ultimately suffering is good in order for us to achieve Nirvana in the end. Well, first of all, two responses to this. First of all, as much as Nirvana seems like a good philosophy, it is not by any means a prominent philosophy in the United States. The resolution is limited to in the United States of America. And unfortunately for my opponent, Buddhist philosophy is not a very prominent philosophy in this country. If you go around asking people, well, if I walked up to an African American person in this country and said, if you're a victim of racism, that's actually good for you because you're suffering and therefore you're going to achieve nirvana, most likely they're not going to agree with me if I say that to them. Also, in addition to that, my opponent has assumed in his case that I was going to come up here and say that basically you shouldn't use jury nullification because it is bad. However, that's not what I'm saying. All I'm saying is that jury nullification is not necessary because we have other democratic means of changing unjust laws, and that jury nullification is essentially ignoring the laws which violates the social contract. That's not saying juries are biased. That's not saying that jury nullification is overall bad. I'm just saying it's not a democratic thing that belongs in a democratic society. And so my opponent has just gotten up there in his last speech and assumed what I was going to say without actually saying or actually knowing what I was going to say. And so, sorry, my timer just died. I'm going to pull it back up here. And so basically, the affirmative side has no reasons why we should use jury nullification. He has the burden of proof in this case. He has to prove to you in the United States criminal justice system, jury nullification ought to be used in the face of perceived injustice. So think to yourself, in his last speech, did he actually address that specifically? All he really did is say, well, if the negative says it's bad, it's actually good. But first of all, I didn't say it's bad, and second of all, he has to prove to you that jury nullification ought to be used. He did not actually specifically address this point. And so basically, what we have here is I have a case that specifically addresses the resolution, and he has a case that uses a philosophy that is not at all prominent in the United States, and makes assumptions on a case that is not true in specific relevance to my case specifically, and so his case cannot work in overall affirming the resolution, and so for these reasons you have to vote for the negative side in today's debate. And I'm open for cross-examination.
Are you ready to begin?
Yeah.
Okay, Judge ready? Punt ready? All right, let's begin. So you talk about how jury nullification isn't democratic. Is that correct?
I say that there's my first contention is that jury nullification oversteps the role of citizens in the democratic process.
So it basically hurts democracy,
It undermines democracy.
which can be interpreted as like hurting democracy, right? Like the institution in which democracy was founded.
What do you mean by that?
So like you saying that it's undermining democracy. When we undermine something that usually like causes like harm to it, would you agree that jury nullification could
All
be
I'm saying in
interpreted
this
as harmful to
contention,
democracy?
all I'm saying in this contention is that we have other means in our democracy by which we can achieve the goals, the so-called goals of jury nullification. The goals of jury nullification supposedly are to give people more of a role in the democratic process. However, we have other means of doing this. We can vote in this country. We can use the
Okay, wait, let's go on that vote. You say people vote, but like the majority of American citizens today don't vote. Like if you look at any of the recent polls, only about like a little less than 30% of actual Americans vote. How can you say that the United States is a democratic nation if not every single person is voting?
Because we have the ability to vote.
So just because
have
we have the ability to do
And
something
in
on
presidential elections, voter participation is above 50%. But just because people don't vote does not mean they don't have the ability to vote. We also have the initiative process, the referendum process. We have the ability to critique the government. These are all ways that are not jury nullification in which we can still fix unjust laws.
All right, but how long does it take to actually do legislative reform?
It can take not long at all. And the thing about jury nullification is that when you use jury nullification, you are not actually removing an unjust law.
Okay, so it's actually causing harm to society then, by using jury nullification.
No, you're just not doing anything about it.
So we're just perpetuating violence.
Okay, let me say, okay. Basically you're saying that if we do something bad, it's good. This is just not a philosophy that's prominent in this country.
Okay, that's not what I was asking about. I was asking, does jury nullification just perpetuate the problem and not solve anything? And just
That's what my case is.
Okay, so it causes more harms then by using jury nullification.
It
than
does not,
actually
I'm
doing
saying it causes more harm, I'm just saying it doesn't get to the root of the problem.
But you said within your rule of law card that it actually will lead to anarchy if we use jury nullification. It destroys if it undermines the rule of law, it will lead to anarchy. This is a true statement.
The definition of anarchy is a system in which laws are ignored, and that is essentially what jury nullification is.
You said jury nullification undermines rule of law. Can we infer from that if we use jury nullification, that will cause anarchy?
If we use it every single time, yes.
Okay, so jury nullification does have a link to a harm for people, citizens.
Yes, that's why we should not use it.
Okay, that's cool. And then so let's talk about this idea of how you say jury nullification is not necessary, okay? So you say this a lot, but what can we actually do then, besides like legislative reform? You said like
voting. We can use voting. We have the initiative and referendum process by which average citizens can propose a new law and vote on that law without even having to involve legislatures.
Okay, I'm gonna take some prep time. Okay, I have 2:18 left. Okay. Is Judge ready? Opponent ready? Alright. Just a brief off-time roadmap. I'm going to be addressing the attack my opponent made against my case, and then I'll be going on to attack his. Okay. So the first issue that we have to talk about within this debate is this idea of why the value criterion of Nirvana and the util underneath the perspective of Buddhist philosophy does not stand. First, I want to reiterate my value criterion, which is that of util, which is actually what is used within the United States government system today. We identify what is the best harm society with causing the minimalistic damage. When we, this is the only idea that is available to policymakers today, because all they have is what's going on within the United States, what their policy will actually do, and how that will be impacting people. That's all they have. They can only weigh the harms and benefits of each of their actions and who's going to be hurting more and which is going to be hurting less. They actually do use util within their society. What I'm advocating for within my app is changing this util, but taking it under the perspective of the Buddhist philosophy, and that causing more harm in turn will be benefiting the majority as a whole, because Nirvana is the best philosophy for society. My opponent goes on to attack this by saying, well, this is not what the most prevalent society, prevalent religion within the United States today. But we have to realize just because something is going on within the United States doesn't mean it doesn't impact other countries around the world. The United States is linked into every single other country within the world. While this resolution might be pertaining just to the United States, it impacts span far out from the United States. It causes harm to countries everywhere. It can cause things to change in every different country. If jury nullification is used within the United States, maybe European countries will adopt it too. This is a real possibility. And the same impacts that are coming off jury nullification can be exacerbated through other countries, which also might have a Buddhist philosophy. What I also want to reiterate is how it doesn't matter what philosophy you are. Everyone will agree that happiness is the ultimate goal. Within my case, I actually talk about why Nirvana is the most preferable value. I talk about how Nirvana is the eternal. It embodies every philosophy together because every philosophy is all about providing happiness. Nirvana's end goal is happiness. Nirvana is the best philosophy under which we can achieve the greatest maximum good for all people. Because as rational human beings, we recognize that achieving self-worth and the best possible society is our ultimate goal. And through promoting Nirvana, while not everyone might not embody this, the idea and concept on which Nirvana is founded will ultimately be the best for society. And then I would like to go on to his attack on how jury nullification is not necessarily democratic, but we have to realize what happens when something is not democratic. That causes harms to the system of democracy. What happens when democracy is undermined? That is going to cause anarchy. My opponent's own case talks about the rule of law, and he says that when rule of law is undermined, that could possibly lead to anarchy. This is his own case. What I'm going to be telling you is that the anarchy would inherently be good, because underneath the Buddhist philosophy, this would ultimately cause the greatest benefit for all people everywhere. And then I would like to go on to my next attack my opponent made, which he said I never really made anything on how jury nullification is inherently bad, but I want to reiterate how I talked about how jury nullification is inherently racist towards people and cause racial bias, and if racism is exacerbated, it can lead to genocide. He never attacked this within his last speech, so he really has no reason to prove this false. So we can actually assume that jury nullification will be racist and cause these bad things. He never attacked this within his last speech. So what we have to realize is that we're causing harm to people, but inherently underneath my philosophy, harm is good, because harm will lead to better in the future. And this is ultimately why jury nullification would be a good thing for society, even though it's causing harm. His only really argument on his case is that jury nullification won't be doing anything to solve the problems. Okay, but what are we going to do left? We're just going to be leaving the problems there. We're still going to be causing harm to society, which is inherently good, but we have to realize jury nullification exacerbates the problem. It makes the problem like 1 billion times worse. That would ultimately be good, because we're going to be accelerating the process of achieving Nirvana. That's what I talk about with my first contention. I talk about how racism will exacerbate the process and increase the timeline and the time frame of which we can achieve to get Nirvana. And for these reasons, and why Buddhism is the best philosophy, you must vote after today's debate. Thank you.
Off the clock in this speech, I'll be addressing my opponent's case, addressing how he attacked my case, and ending with a few key voter issues for why you should vote negative in today's debate. I'll begin right now. So, in addressing my case, my opponent basically attacked my case. First of all, he did not address my value criterion of preserving the social contract and law and order. He did not address these, so he must concede that these are indeed very important value and value criterion. Basically, his only attacks on my contentions was that my contentions lead to harm as a result, or my contentions prove that jury nullification leads to harm, and harm is good. And so basically, you have to address this in addressing my opponent's case. And we need to go back to this idea of Buddhist philosophy and Nirvana. And my opponent basically presented to it the premise that suffering is necessary to achieve Nirvana and that suffering is inevitable. But suffering is not inevitable. Even Buddhist philosophy says that we can achieve separation from suffering if we get rid of material desires and wants. So my opponent is trying to say that suffering is inevitable, therefore we should just accept suffering in order to achieve good in the end. But suffering is not inevitable even according to Buddhist philosophy. Buddhist philosophy says that we can get rid of suffering by ridding ourselves of the wants and desires. And so my opponent is basically presenting you with a philosophy in which he is not completely justifying all of his points, because he's saying that suffering is inevitable, but even Buddhist philosophy says that we can get rid of suffering while we live in this world. And so basically, my opponent's case is essentially saying that suffering is inevitable, and it's necessary to achieve nirvana, and that essentially we need to have bad things happen to us in our lifetime in order to achieve nirvana, period. I think that's what he's saying. I didn't really understand some of it, but I'm pretty sure. And so basically he's saying, one of his main points is that racism, as caused by jury nullification, is actually good because it leads to suffering on the parts of those people, and that would be good for them in the end. But I think if you asked any person of a racial minority, if you said a racial slur to them, I don't think they would look back at you and say, I really appreciate you saying that racist thing to me because I will achieve nirvana in the end. I really don't think you would agree with that, Judge, and I don't think most people of racial minorities would believe that suffering is actually good for them. Same thing with the Holocaust. My opponent mentioned the Holocaust. And he didn't say it directly, but he implied that the Holocaust was good because it created suffering. I hate to say it, but for the 12 million people that died in the Holocaust, I don't think that they would agree with you that the suffering that happened to them was good during the Holocaust, and that actually led to nirvana for them in the end. So basically, you have to ask yourself today, do you really think that this philosophy really applies well to this case? Do you believe that we have to have suffering in order to achieve eternal happiness? And so basically, my opponent's case does not really address the topic of jury nullification. All he says is that because jury nullification leads to bad things, that it's actually good. But you have to ask yourself today, is this philosophy the overall, the prominent philosophy in our American culture? Do you actually believe that if we need to have all of this suffering in order to achieve eternal happiness in the end? And so I'm going to end with a few key voter issues for why you should vote for the negative side. My first key voting issue is racism is not good, okay? My opponent says that jury nullification, we have a moral obligation to use jury nullification because it leads to racism. And I have to ask yourself in this round, if you think racism is good, then you I guess you should vote for the affirmative, because that's what he's saying. He's saying racism is good because it leads to suffering and it leads to nirvana in the end. That is essentially what his argument is. Jury nullification leads to racism, racism leads to suffering, and suffering is necessary to achieve nirvana. And so if you believe that racism is not good, then you should probably not be voting for the affirmative side in today's debate. My second key voting issue is basically my opponent does not directly attack my case at all. He does not attack my value and value criteria in preserving the social contract and law and order, and his only major attack on my case is that the things that I've talked about during nullification are bad, therefore they're good. But again, as we talked about earlier, his premise that suffering is inevitable is simply not true and is not supported by Buddhist philosophy. My last key voting issue for why you should vote for the negative is that my opponent's case does not really significantly address the resolution. As the affirmative side, he has the burden of proof. He has to prove to you that in the United States criminal justice system, jury nullification ought to be used in the perceived injustice. All he said was that bad things could happen as a result of jury nullification, which is actually good. And so you have to ask yourself today, Judge, do you think that things like racism, things like the Holocaust, things that cause suffering are actually good for us in the end? My opponent's going to come back up here in his next speech and probably say what he said in the first two speeches. He's going to say that under Buddhist philosophy, if we have all these horrible things happen, that's actually good for us. But ask yourself, is this a prominent philosophy in the United States? And is this something that really that is really supported by Buddhist philosophy? As we talked about earlier, suffering is not necessarily inevitable under Buddhist philosophy. So, if you believe that racism is not good, if you believe that my opponent did not attack my case and did not actually address the resolution, then you must vote for the negative side in today's debate.
Okay, I'm gonna take my last minute. 2 minutes, 18 seconds. Okay. Okay. Is Judge ready?
Yeah.
Is opponent ready? Okay. Brief off-time roadmap. I'm going to be addressing the value-value criterion debate, and then going on to show why you should be voting for me today. Okay. So the brunt of this round is going to be within the value-value criterion debate, as this is what we both spent most time on. My opponent said that Nirvana and this idea of Buddhism isn't the most prevalent value in today's society, but thus shouldn't be used. What we have to realize is it doesn't matter. We all agree that happiness and peace are our end goals in society. Whenever you look at diplomatic relationships with any other country, we all agree that everyone should be happy and everyone should be peaceful. And Nirvana provides a means to the ends. That is what I'm arguing with my case. No matter where you are, the United States embodies the idea of peace and this idea of everyone being happy. And Nirvana is that means to the end. He said that it's not prevalent within society, so we shouldn't look to it. But again, everyone respects that happiness is the most important thing. I talk about that within all my case, that we should be looking towards Nirvana because it embodies all different philosophies everywhere. My opponent said that I never addressed his value-value criterion, but I don't need to because I said it within my own case, that Buddhism and the idea of Nirvana encompasses all values, all value criterions. It embodies everything because it's beyond what we can perceive imaginable. It's something that can't be described with words, but we know what it is. We know that it's going to be this great thing in which everyone can live happily and freely. And this moves me on to the second point my opponent made, in which he says that I'm basically saying the racism's okay and genocide's okay. This is not a true statement at all. He's saying, I'm not at all saying that the racism and the genocide was a good, morally good thing that we were doing. What I'm saying is that the ends of what happened because of these were ultimately a good thing. What happened after the Hitler reign was over? What happened after the genocide? We all agreed that fighting and doing all this stuff was inherently hurting people and that we should be focusing more on peace. We are pushing ourselves towards Nirvana and towards happiness for everyone after the reign. Racism, I will agree, is not a bad thing. But what the ends of racism is what is good. My value criterion is util. Util is basically looking at the consequences of action. It's not looking at the action itself. My opponent's case, every argument my opponent made was basically talking about why the idea of what I'm saying is fundamentally wrong, but that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying the ends of what we're doing is the ultimate thing we should be looking at, and we're evaluating that underneath Buddhism. And then I would like to go against the attack my opponent case, made against my case. He said that I really don't address the resolution, but we have to realize my entire case is focused on showing why jury nullification is bad and how inherently that is a good thing. That is my entire case. I read 2 distinct cards on how jury nullification causes racism and will perpetuate it, and how racism can lead to bad things. This is a direct link to the resolution because it specifically talked about jury nullification. I did address the resolution. That is the entire purpose of an ACT case. And then I want to go, and then he makes an argument about how I concede the value criterion, but no, like I said, Buddhism encompasses all value criterions. And if you truly believe that this world should be founded on the idea of happiness and freedom for all people, Nirvana is the best policy, and you must vote ACT today. Thank you.
What do you say?
It's an interesting round.
Yeah.
Oh my god. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry about this. I'm so sorry.
What are you sorry about?
That I ran this case. So sorry.
Did you?
You told me after we debated yesterday that I was going to run this great case.
That I was gonna run this case.
This case that I just. Oh.
I'm so sorry.
That made my day.
I don't understand what you have to apologize for.
I don't know, it just seems really mean. So that's why.
Hey, you know, I mean, it's
Like, it took every contention of his and agreed with it and put it on.
Yeah.
And like, there's no way you can argue against.
That was the point.
As an
I was really banking on you reading an F.
Yeah, he was banking on you saying it was biased and all that. Oh, no, you told.
That's the argument I was thinking you were
all right,
making.
guys. Have a good rest of the day.
Not that that's pretty good.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Oh yes, I did.